Hello, everyone. Happy Thursday. Happy almost Friday, as I like to call it. It's a beautiful day here in East Tennessee. And today I have Robert Kronovich, Director of Advisory Services, on the line with me. Hello, RK.
Hi, greetings from Arizona, where it's not ridiculously hot yet, so we're enjoying it as much as we can.
Yeah, excited to have you today. Excited for this topic. Today, we're kind of shifting gears to public housing. I know public housing differs from a lot of the organizations that you and I work with just because of the regulatory differences, and they're unique. Every housing authority is different in some way, shape, or form. So let's just go ahead and kick it off. If you're joining us today, please say hey and let us know what you're doing this weekend. We're always excited to hear from our viewers. But let's just go ahead and jump right into it, RK. Why are housing authorities a unique segment of the market?
So I think there's the obvious parts of it, which if someone puts some thought about and thinking what a housing authority does, there's the just the very basic element of providing a human need of
Right.
shelter, and the importance of that, and the fact that that is critical in a lot of areas, not necessarily large cities either. I think people would be surprised by the number of housing authorities that are in your county, or even if you live in a small town. There's a good chance that your small town has some degree of public housing there. So, and it goes beyond just providing basic human service of shelter.
Right.
In larger cities, there's a strong need to bring workforce into the area where they would be working for an easier commute or for an economic advantage for them. So it's not just, especially in cities that tend to have a high cost of living, it's not just providing a place for people to live, so they're not living on the street. It goes beyond that. It's also the opportunity, because not everyone is an executive level white collar worker earning an outstanding salary.
Right.
They work in an area where the cost of living is so high that a salary that would be very attractive in a lot of other areas barely covers your cost of living in some of these major cities. So it's also an economic incentive and a workforce incentive to be able to provide affordable housing for employees, whether you're private sector or your public sector, being able to attract a workforce. Amazon is classic for this as well. They do a lot of studies on the areas they're going to be moving into to see if the basics of infrastructure and livability and cost of living can be addressed and met. Public housing does one of that too. So it ties also into economic goals of the workforce, and also in redeveloping downtown areas. Just a number of economic goals that serve either the private sector, the public sector, the community in general, that the community's bought into, but doesn't necessarily know it trickles down to the level of housing authorities. And then one last area, which I think everyone can has some experience in potentially, even though you might not know it, is dealing with folks who have disabilities, they have medical needs,
Right.
they're a disabled veteran, even folks who are subject to domestic abuse. Having affordable housing is a quality of life opportunity for them to be able to live in affordable housing and participate in your community, rather than having to go to a specific institution to seek care or potentially live there long term. So it's also an advantage to being able to deal with solutions that uniquely were just addressed by, all right, so veterans, that just belongs to the Veterans Association, right? That just let this person just be handled by that. You give them those opportunities. Um, and along the way, a lot of housing authorities rely upon landlords and their property to be able to house people. It's not just um, buildings that are built by housing authorities or owned by housing authorities. A good part of their success is the fact that landlords are willing to sign up for housing choice voucher systems, and the landlords like the general. There's two things that attract landlords for participating in housing authorities. One is it's usually a guaranteed income, because even if let's say you have someone move out and your property is vacant, if you're part of the housing choice voucher program for housing authority, a lot of them will actually continue to pay a monthly fee to you to be able to keep your property ready for any potential tenants that the housing authority would need to house. So And they tend to like the fact that there are some strict requirements that come to finding folks for these properties. So landlords see it as an economic incentive for them as well. And that was very important during COVID when a lot of industries shut down. Landlords were still able to stay in business, provide housing, and knew that they were getting reliable sources of income for their property, where as a lot of other people were not necessarily facing that. So those are the key areas I think housing authorities want to tell people about when they're dealing with software or technology, as a way to initially indicate that, this isn't just needs issues or
Mhm.
challenges or risks. This is actually something that is a very basic service that also has these overtones in the economic and workforce.
Sure, sure. That was great. That was a great answer. What are some of the common regulatory challenges that housing authorities face?
So the world that they live in, which is under HUD, Housing and Urban Development, is really tricky. I'm not going to say it's trickier than a lot of other things we see in local government, but it requires a lot of knowledge and understanding. It's not something that someone can come in. Let's say you've worked in local government, or you've worked for software vendors that provide local government. You're not going to be able to sit down with the housing authority and in 2 or 3 hours figure out all the complexities of what they're doing. It
Right.
takes a lot of time, because housing and urban development provides a lot of the regulatory and the guidance and the compliance. Their funding tends to come from Congress, so you're also reporting to another entity as well in the three
Mhm.
branches of government. A lot of times you're partnering with a local community. You might be a housing authority for a county, but you're also providing the voucher and property management for the local cities. And you have a local governing board that oversees your housing authority, much like a town or a city council does, that they have their own requirements. Then you also have public relations pressures. Every
Mm.
city is unique. So the mix of all these things makes the policy and compliance portion of it incredibly complicated. And on top of that, if you're lucky enough and you get approval through Congress to become an MTW housing authority, the regulatory burden gets lifted to a degree, and you now have the room to specifically target your programs to your local needs. Unique opportunities that are not defined by HUD as a specific type of program, but you have the ability to do it and implement it for your local community. When you get MTW status, you get the freedom to do that and do sort of your own self-regulation. But that just doesn't mean you can just go and do what you want. You still have to do internal reporting and documentation and maintain compliance on a lot of things. So the policy and compliance portion of it is incredibly complicated, very difficult to understand. And like I said, it's just not something you're going to be able to figure out in a 2 or 3 hour period. And I think a lot of housing authorities, that's their challenge when they're talking to someone. It's like, I
Sure.
can't possibly explain all the intricacies of what we need to do over a lunch. It really has to
Mhm.
be a process to make sure all that's covered when they select a new piece of technology or a new software.
Right. We do have some questions in the chat. Hey guys, Samuel comes to us with, how can public housing authorities strike a balance between implementing digital transformation initiatives and addressing urgent infrastructure needs in existing public housing units?
So I think that what needs to be done, and this goes back to some of the things that we tackle in what we do, which is, if you think of a lot of your technology in terms of addressing enterprise risk, that's where you
Mhm.
tend to get the best solutions. Otherwise, it becomes very difficult to prioritize.
Right.
You're being pulled in a million different directions. You have internal initiatives that you're trying to do, like in information technology, which generally helps the organization, but you can't necessarily tie it to a specific program. So a lot of this comes from IT being at the table, and I'm making assumption here that this person is an IT, but it's the first thing that came to mind for me. Making sure IT has a seat at the table at the executive level, enterprise level discussions on things, so that
Mhm.
all of your decisions are driving towards the key goals of what the housing authority is looking to do and what the governing board is looking to do. But at the same time, finding that balance of taking care of some back end things that are critical for you to do, but just isn't something you're going to go explain to a governing board or do a news release on. So you really have to partner with your executive team to help prioritize. Otherwise, everything becomes a priority. And as some people like to say, when everything's a priority, then nothing's a priority. So that, I think that's the real key to keeping
Yeah.
things on track and being proactive rather than just living in a reactive state.
Right, absolutely. Thank you for your question, Sam. Maya comes to us with, how can public housing authorities ensure that the digital transformation is inclusive and accessible for residents with varying levels of digital literacy and access to technology? That's a great question. Great question.
So there's several components of it. One of it is obviously what we do in strategic planning and in terms of technology. But we are only a portion of that. We've also
Mhm.
partnered with marketing firms in the past, and not just strictly brand advertisement, but also looking at doing surveys with end users and finding out how are they accessing this technology. The reason that's a great question is because prior to COVID, a lot of housing authorities just didn't have a lot of options. So they really couldn't try and target their services for their community because a lot of the
Mhm.
technology was just unaffordable. That's changed to a degree. And I want to be careful here because some housing authorities have a good amount of funding to be able to tackle initiatives. A lot of housing authorities are very, 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 very limited on what they can do in terms of resources and funding. So I don't want to exclude a lot of smaller housing authorities, and they number in the thousands across. But that's a key point. Understanding if your community is going to be accessing everything exclusively via phone. Are there opportunities to put kiosks? Some cities we've talked to recently would like to put
Mhm.
kiosks in supermarkets, in restaurants that are frequented by a lot of people, so that they can transact services right there at that location on a known platform that is being controlled by the city or the housing authority, and therefore not have to worry about, is this person trying to use a 15-year-old computer with an old browser to
Right.
access these services. So it's going to be a combination of understanding what your community is based upon what you already know about your residents, and especially your landlords. Let's not forget your landlords. Your landlords,
Yeah.
in some cases, are using basic technology as well, or completely mobile technology to try and manage. Are they going to get paid? How do I update that a unit is ready to be used in the Section 8 program? So it's not just your residents and those you're trying to house. It's also those who have an economic participation in what the housing authority provides. And so it's
Right.
understanding what that is. And if you don't have a clear picture on that, there are opportunities to use firms who can do basic surveys. We can do those as well, and then get an idea as to what sort of technology they're using, and then focus on those key areas.
Right. Sam comes back to us with, how do you prioritize the digital transformation initiatives in public housing, given, sorry, the limited budgets and competing demands?
So I think there's some things that have to be absolute priority, and I think cybersecurity is the most important one. There just is no
Mhm.
there's no good enough option. There's no set it and forget it option like we talk about. I think the cybersecurity and housing authorities have a tremendous amount of personal data,
Oh, yeah.
a tremendous amount. They deal with passports, birth certificates, medical records, for example, statements of income, tax documents. So their requirement to protect personally identifiable information should be the key, most number one thing. And I think what comes second to that is just business continuity, which is with housing authorities, especially the housing authority can't take a day off or a week off because they had a
Mhm.
cybersecurity incident or they're going to a new system. There just really isn't a chance for downtime. And nowadays, your potential residents, your current residents, and your landlords are accessing your systems 24 hours a day. So you don't even have the weekends now to shut down. So, in my mind, prioritizing cybersecurity and the protection of the information, and two, solutions that provide continuity of service, so that you can keep your platforms up and running, should always be the priority with housing authorities. And I think those two, for a lot of folks, is enough to focus on and make sure you're up to date on. And then you can start looking at the things that fall underneath them. I think your operations folks are obviously going to say that their needs take priority. But in reality, it's the security and reliability of the systems has to be paramount.
All right, great question. Very good question. So, what data issues do housing authorities face?
Yeah, so the most important one I already touched on, which is the variety of information that they have,
Hmm.
keeping it safe and secure, the ability for potential residents and then residents and landlords who have to resubmit information on a regular basis, their ability to provide secure uploads of that information to you without having to come into the housing authority and speak to someone at a counter. Um, but this is just intake of data and
Right.
process issues. The reporting world is wide open in housing authorities. And again, it's because of the vast amount of regulation that they face, either internally, locally, or at the federal level. And not only the complexity of the reporting data and how that can change, but then on top of it as well, your key stakeholders in the organization need metrics, performance data. They need to understand things that are not necessarily regulatory, but they need to know, do I have enough staff working on this? Is the process on this taking 10 minutes to do with the resident when it could actually take 2 minutes or even less or be automated? So the data needs are extreme in housing authorities, and it's just one area where they've had a lot of difficulty in developing. I think it's getting better with the new workforce coming in who's already data centric, and luckily a lot of them know how to get information out of a large data set already. Some of them have just been doing it for fun at home. And so their needs, the new workforce coming in, their own needs for data consumption have to be met by what you can provide. And so it has to be a
Hmm.
focus when you're looking at a new system or even existing system. Do I have Power BI? Do I have a lot of solutions that I can use for slicing and dicing data and building dashboards? Do I have the staff trained properly in what they need to do to be able to get their data? And in some cases, there's also employee unions in some of these housing authorities that have very strict control over what an employee can and cannot do. So that complicates it as well. The end user may not be able to allow to run a lot of their own data reports. It has to be housed with a specific person within the organization. So that's another layer of complexity that goes on top of data. And there's no one unique solution for all those. Again, these are things that you have to think about when you start looking at technology and software solution, whether you're in the housing authority or you're a software vendor that's looking to be able to provide a solution to a housing authority.
All right. So, speaking of software solutions, why are there very few off of the shelf solutions for housing authorities?
I think there's a variety of reasons. It's gotten better since COVID because a lot of the technology that was inaccessible to a lot of housing authorities because of funding and resourcing became more affordable. A lot of housing authorities didn't even have Zoom accounts, but now a lot of people, if not everyone we deal with on a daily basis, the organization already has the ability to handle virtual meetings. Um, those solutions are cheaper now, so that they are a little more affordable, and they can be implemented, and they don't require a lot of overhead, especially for an IT department. They're usually hosted services, which is great. You want to be able to bring on a solution that does not add to your IT overhead, because the other problem is housing authorities can't just run out and hire 2 or 3 more IT folks. Both with the job market the way it's been recently, it's very difficult to offer competitive salary. And two, you just don't have the funding and the resources to be able to put a full-time position together. So, plus all the other things we've already talked about in terms of the complexity and the uniqueness of what housing authorities do. But when you come to like ERP solutions and data solutions, a lot of them just are not. They're not affordable for the housing authority, or you have an unnecessary burden of modules that you don't need, that you would have to wind up buying with it as well. And I think that's why we see in housing authorities for things like your ERP product, there are very unique solutions from companies that are geared strictly towards housing authorities, because they have to offer a platform that does everything that you need at a reasonable price, without having some back end burden on systems and things that are great for an ERP system, but they're not
Hmm.
for an ERP system for a housing authority.
All right. Bob comes to us. Hey, Bob. He says a lot of ERP systems can be used for very complicated processes like manufacturing or companies with very intricate regulatory laws. Can these be used in housing authorities as well?
Yeah, it ties into the last thing we talked about.
Hmm.
Yeah, and I've actually been asked this a lot, and it's not just in housing authorities; it's in local and county and state government as well. And the answer is yes. These products can, and there'll be some caveats that I'm going to give on that. They can address those needs, but they tend to be incredibly expensive. They tend to require a lot of customization. They have really extended implementation deadlines or timelines. And then something we talk about occasionally on these, there are some software companies, unfortunately, that are going to promise you things that they never will deliver, either because it's not cost effective for them to build a one off solution just for you. They can certainly just bill you for the entire cost of doing it, but it would be a sum that housing authorities would not be able to afford. So you have to be careful when some other product comes in and says, "Hey, we do federal systems, we do systems for courts, we do systems for manufacturing, we do international, we build systems for NASA," is one thing I've heard, and that's great if you have those types of budgets and that kind of time and those types of resources. Housing authorities don't have that, so be careful of software companies that say, "Of course, we can take care of this. We can build this out to exactly the way you want it." Um, Possible, but it's very tricky getting there.
Right. So, Presley King, hello, and thank you for joining us today. Um, uh, they say, thank you for all the hard work you did with our PHA. How can I make our IT folks understand the larger vision of the agency? That's a great question, Presley. Great question.
So there's a number of ways to approach that. The way I've always liked to approach it is if the executive team and your C-suite folks have some clearly defined goals of the reason why, and this actually ties into enterprise risk as well. We've talked about in some other presentations. The reason why enterprise risk is tackled by an organization is because because there are certain, you have to do things a certain way because of who you are and the way you provide a
Mhm.
service or the expectation. And there's also the values that you have either because of your own or because this is what the community wants from you, or your leadership or governing board does. The best way to handle IT prioritization and understanding how IT can serve those is getting a clear definition from your executive staff through something like even like a business continuity plan we talk about all the time.
Mhm.
Um, in the event that there's a disaster recovery situation or a regional disaster that takes down your IT systems, it's important to know from your leadership what are the key things that have to be up and running first, because you can't tackle 35 things at the same time when you're trying to
Mhm.
recover from a disaster. You have to be selective and get the most important systems up and running first. That's a great way to talk to your executive team and your stakeholders and get some prioritization about what the most important thing is for them. So if your executive staff is able to give you a goal and a vision, you can then decide, this project I'm working on in IT, is it helping or furthering that mission or that goal or that vision? And if it's not, then I need to question why I'm doing it, because I have 18 other things waiting that are of greater priority and actually do address those visions. So it's a great way to help prioritize, but not put the burden exclusively on IT to try and understand operational things, which is not,
Mhm.
IT is not the end user of your systems. They support it and they help maintain it. So you need guidance from your executive and your leadership to help IT understand what the overall vision is and then be able to tie in what IT does
Yeah.
back to the overall goals of the organization.
I'm going to sort of build on Presley's question here. I'm an executive of a housing authority. What questions should I be asking my IT department, or maybe even my end user, my employees?
Great question. Um, when's the last time you tested disaster recovery?
Hmm.
And that should not be a siloed thing within IT. Whenever you test disaster recovery, you really need to test it, which means you have to get executives involved.
Right.
again, for the piece that I just talked about,
Yep.
prioritization of what systems coming back up first. So, how often are you patching your workstations? Um, where's your current copy of your IT policies and procedures? And
Mm,
again, these are not things that an executive has to understand technically,
right.
but executives, again, going back to enterprise risk, they understand risks and they understand a lot of the concepts behind these things. So don't discount the fact that even though you're an executive or you're in leadership and you don't have an IT background, that there's no way I can make sense of what I'm being told, or see if I'm being told the truth or not. Ask these questions. Yeah, when was your last policy and procedures revision done?
Yeah.
When's the last time someone did a cybersecurity audit on you? What's your current IT strategic plan? What are you looking at for your budget for next year? These are all valid questions you can ask of IT, and they should be able to provide those results to you. And as we always say, if you think something doesn't make sense or you're not quite sure, then hire a professional. It doesn't have to be a consultant like us, but get a professional involved to really dive in there. But most of the time, as someone who deals with risk on a daily basis, you're going to be able to understand something's not quite right here. Why is it taking them so long to show me what a disaster recovery plan is? Why can they
Right.
not point to what the current policies and procedures is, and where it's located and how employees can access it? So basic questions like that, your IT department should be able to answer or provide. And do the same thing with consultants as well.
Right.
You bring in a technology consultant, ask them the hard questions and get answers to your satisfaction. Don't let them off the hook just because you think they're in technology, so I'm not able to understand their world.
Yes, exactly. We need to put those questions in a document and blast that out. I think those are great. Great. Thank you, Presley, for your question. JD asks, what cybersecurity areas are the most important for housing authorities?
Easy question. All of them. So when we go in and we do cybersecurity assessments and make strategic recommendations or tie some of these strategies into an IT strategic plan, we use the NIST set of standards, roughly 22 key areas to look at. The benefit of those, and this is all publicly available. This it's put out by the
Mhm.
National Institute of Standards and Technology, a government entity. So a lot of this framework is actually free for you to look at and download and understand, which is one of the reasons why we use it. We don't use something as proprietary or hidden or complicated. We use existing open source standards. The beauty with NIST is it covers the technical aspects of things, looking at your firewalls and intrusion prevention systems. It also goes into operational impacts. Are you using good change management policies in IT? When someone goes in and makes a change to a server, is that being documented? If it's an important change, is it going up through an approval layer just so someone
Mhm.
else knows that this is occurring on a major system? And it goes off into other areas like, do you have a cybersecurity officer designated in your organization? Are you using cybersecurity education tools with your end users? So all of those areas have to be addressed to be able to mitigate cybersecurity risk. And there really just aren't any that can be overlooked or shortcutted. You really have to address all key areas of cybersecurity.
Yeah,
Again, because
absolutely.
the incredible amount of data that housing authorities have.
Yeah. Hey, Dawn. Dawn's joining us today. And she says, as a housing authority CEO, I think we need a project plan and charter for every project. How can we ensure that project charters become the norm for project managing? Great question, Dawn. Thank you.
I ask for them, insist upon them,
Mhm.
and they're really not complicated to put together. We're not talking, and some people tend to think that when it comes to a project plan or putting a charter together, that we're talking about pages and pages to talk about one single project out of many. That's not the case at all. A project charter can be half a page. It can be very simple statements of, this is what we're looking to do. These are the resources that we need. This is the type of funding required. This is the expected outcome. And then this is the way we're going to sustain the solution that we get out of the project charter. And these don't have to be paragraphs. They can be one or two simple sentences that can be put in front of an executive team or even a vendor that you're looking at and say, This
Right.
is what we need. Please tell us, what your quote is for providing these services, or if it's a governing board, this is what we're looking to do. Feel free to ask any questions you have about us, or about the project itself, and get simple approval. Because if it's a 5-page charter for a project, no one's going to read it. And the same thing with the project plan. The more difficult, unless you're building a bridge,
Hmm.
or a roadway or a ship or an airplane, you don't have to have project plans that go on for pages and have 400 subtasks.
Right.
So some people think, well, I'm not going to be able to cover everything I need in a basic document. Well, as we've learned as consultants the hard way, is no one's going to read a 200-page report either. So you have to
True.
find the balance with your audience of giving them the information they need to make a decision, which is, okay, we'll fund your project, go for it. And realizing that if you overwhelm them with data, that's not going to do you any good either. You have to find that balance, but there's a way to do it efficiently. And if you're an executive, ask for that information. Ask for the high level summary. Set aside the technical stuff. Tell me, if I give you $40,000 to do this project out of our operating budget, what am I going to get out of it, and how's that going to serve the people here in the room? Ask them those questions. And if they can't answer at that level, then the person's not bringing you the right information or delivering you the right message on the project.
Right, exactly. Robert, could you give us an example of maybe a client that you've worked with, not mentioning any names, but sort of a case study? Let's talk about a real life example of where maybe we've helped the digital transformation process in a public housing authorities. What were the problems? What was going on? How did we help?
So the one I love to talk about, and it was a great project. I loved working on this project, and it's a rarity, but it's a rarity that doesn't have to be a rarity. And so I'll
Mhm.
explain here. We were brought in, with a housing authority that did not like their current system, their core foundational, what other areas would call an ERP system, but housing authorities just call it's their foundational work product. It does all their workflows. It runs all their housing operations. And they were in an area where they did not like the product. They felt that the vendor was falling way behind. They hadn't reinvested in the product. And there was enough dissatisfaction that they were at the point of, I guess, we start looking someplace else.
Mhm.
But before doing that, they brought us in to take a look at their existing processes, the existing platform, see if there's a way to re-leverage that platform. In other words, not lose all that money that you put into that software product in the first place.
Mhm.
Um, but if it's clear after looking at everything that the software was not going to be able to serve the organization's needs, and really was a problem, a bottleneck in workflows, then we would be able to give them some clear recommendations as to then what you need to go out and look for. The good news is, there were a lot of areas, and this is very common. If we're brought in early enough, we can identify the areas that are actually the way you've been using the software versus the way it was designed to be worked, and it's just a simple reconfiguration of a setting or a workflow takes care of the problem. A lot of organizations don't stay current on their training, so you have staff turnover, and you have a new group in your staff, sometimes a very large number if you've had high turnover, that were never trained on this product that you're using. The people who were there for the initial go live got trained, but no one's been trained since. So people weren't even using the product correctly. Their expectations were wrong, or in a lot of cases, they didn't even know functionality was there that they had been asking for a long time until someone pointed it out to them. So they did the smart route of making sure that all of that was taken care of and defined first before they were going to go down the road of replacing, their system. Because no matter what kind of organization you are, um, you will put your staff through turmoil by bringing in a new product, just because of the timeline, the selection process, the training process, the testing process, and just the fact that you are challenging everyone's world,
Mhm.
with the threat of a new system that might do things differently. It might do it better. In fact, it should, but it's still a threat to the way I do things. So there's a lot of, political and change management turmoil as well as technical turmoil. So you really need to make sure you have as much of that covered before you're going to go down the road of throwing out your existing system and going to a brand new one. So that's why I like talking about this housing authority, is they did it the correct way. It saved them a lot
Mhm.
of money in the long run because they were likely going to sign with one vendor who had been courting them for a long time without ever doing a requirements definition process, without actually diving into what they need to fix and define internally. They were just going to go down the road of selecting another software vendor. And the software vendor, of course, as we talk about, says, sure, I can take you live in 90 days on your new system. And you would be quite likely back where you were when we first started working with this particular housing authority, but no better off. And now you burn change management, you burn political capital, you've burned budgeted funds, you've reputation you might have with your employee. There's just a lot of negatives that come out of it. So the earlier we are brought into the process actually saves you a lot of money in the long run and avoids a lot of pain and heartache that organizations face.
Yes, I love that. I love that story. That's one of my favorite clients that we've helped here at Avero. So my last question is, how can public housing authorities stay abreast of emerging technologies and trends in the digital space to make sure that they are implementing effective tools and strategies?
This one is surprising that a lot of people don't talk about it as much, but it's not just necessarily staying in touch with your peers in housing authorities. And there's a housing authority group just for CIOs of housing authorities. There's a lot of user groups that are regional. The software companies put out their user groups as well. But that also tends to be siloed as well, because again, each housing authority is so different the way they do things and what they're looking to serve in their community, that a housing authority in Silicon Valley can talk to someone on the other side in San Francisco or in Oakland, and you might be trying to talk about the same technology, but the outcomes and the needs and the funding could be completely different. I think what you need to do is establish relationships with consultants like us, and that doesn't mean you have to hire us, but reach out and talk to us.
No pressure. No pressure.
Yeah. And it's the same thing with software companies as well. You don't have to talk to other housing authorities. Develop relationships with folks who look at the technology on a daily basis, because people would be surprised. We give out free advice all day long.
We do.
I mean, it's the reason why we say, if you have any questions, send us a question in here. Send us an email. Reach out to us on LinkedIn, on social media. If you want to have a lunch, you want to come into the office, whatever you need to do to come and talk to us and tell us what your problem and concern is, I guarantee you we're going to give you some guidance and helpful advice, and not put a bill in front of you for an hour of our time. It's as simple as that. I think that's the best solution for a lot of housing authorities, to get a perspective as to what's out there and what the possibilities are, without having to talk directly to your software company or someone else in another housing authority. Get some good perspectives from a wide variety of areas.
Right. Absolutely. I love that answer. Well, RK, I don't have any more questions. Do you think there's anything in particular about housing authorities and digital transformation projects that we didn't cover today? You guys asked tons of questions. So thank you all for participating today.
No, those are the key areas. And again, I want people to focus on cybersecurity, whether you're an executive or you're in IT. Please, please, please take the cybersecurity seriously. Don't assume your backups are working. Test them out. Involve your executive staff. Have them invest their time in tabletop exercises, because when the real thing happens, whether it's a disaster, regional disaster, or it's a simple equipment failure, or something worse like a cybersecurity incident, you are all going to have to work together as a team to get operations back up and running as quickly as possible. And waiting until the disaster itself to try and figure that out is terrible. It extends timelines down to weeks or months, and there's a lot of heartache and reputation loss that comes with that. So my key message: take cybersecurity seriously.
Yes, absolutely. And ask questions, right? I think that's the general message here as well. If you don't understand something, ask questions, lean on your peers, but also lean on companies like ours. It doesn't have to be a Vero. If you need help in this area, please reach out to us. Please join us for our lives. We're on every social media platform, YouTube, LinkedIn. My information is all over the internet, so please feel free to reach out. And if there's Also, another topic you guys would like to hear us speak about, or if you'd like to join us for a live, we're looking for guest speakers to come on our live cast. So I'm going to throw that commercial out there. If you want to come on our lives, please send me a message. But thank you, Robert, for your time today. This has been great. I've loved this whole conversation, and thank you all for joining us. We'll see you next week. Thanks.
Bye.
Bye.